John, why don't you take it away?
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Fountain Creek Watershed webinar. Full name, enhancing wetlands, increasing groundwater, and revitalizing keystone species. Presented for Wild Connections by Jerry Mallet. I'm your host, John Stansfield. My fellow Wild Connections board member, Allison Bonsky, you've just heard from, but now wanted to have her introduced formally because she's the one that's really making this all happen. She's our technical support person. Allison?
Welcome, everybody. I've been involved with Wild Connections for over 25 years, and it's a wonderful organization. I'll ask everyone to keep their cameras off and to mute themselves during the presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, you can put them in the chat, and then there'll be a chance at the end for questions and answers. Thank you all for coming.
I see that a few people have already visited the chat down at the bottom of your screen. And so we'll hopefully there'll be more for the end of our time together. Well, I want to tell you a little bit more about Wild Connections if you need to know. Wild Connections works to ensure the survival of intact roadless areas, native species, and ecological richness in central Colorado's upper Arkansas and South Platte river basins. We focus on strategies that will result in a landscape-wide network of protected core reserve areas, and connecting what we call wildways, that is the connections that by which animals and people travel and even plants move, so wildways. Wild Connections acknowledges our region as the ancestral lands of the Ute, Cheyenne, Jicarilla, Apache, Arapaho, and other indigenous peoples. Our presenter tonight, Jerry Mallet, has a notable background in outdoor activities and environmental protection. Here we go. And it's all true. He's a hiker, skier, filmmaker, Western Field representative for the Wilderness Society, president of the Adventure Travel Society, founding board member of American Rivers, a national organization, president of Colorado Headwaters, and partner in the Keystone Ecosystems Initiative, about which we will be discussing tonight and learning from. Allison's already mentioned that if you have questions, do enter them in on the chat, and we'll get to you at the very end and come back and hopefully be able to answer all of your questions. So here we go. Jerry, I guess, take it away.
Very much. I want to thank you for that introduction. It was long. And John and I started doing wilderness work in 1966 and 67 when I lived in Colorado Springs. And you can see he's been on it for the best part of the last 60 years. So it's been great to be with him. And I sure thank Wild Connections for hosting this webinar tonight. What I want to talk about is beavers and how they tie into our ecosystem. But before that, I want to give a shout out to the Fountain Creek Watershed District and their leader, Allison Shuck, who is the VP or the ED for the organization. They're doing the heavy lifting in over 900 miles of water and land from the top of Palmer Divide all the way to Pueblo. And they've done an excellent job, and they sure have a heck of a job ahead of them. So please give them some consideration as we look at this opportunity to increase and improve the watershed along the system. As we know, we do have beavers in Colorado in the West. The species had an origin in Europe, but by the 1700s, they'd been mainly trapped out. And when the trappers got to the United States in the mid 1700s, they found fertile ground, particularly in the Rockies here. As a result, the trappers almost decimated the population. Then the miners and the hard rock individuals came in and hit the streams very hard, increasing the load of heavy metals. And farmers also had a problem with beavers. It's impossible to be able to plow a wetland, as the beavers found out. There's no real reason to trap beavers for sport, and that's being considered because of their potential to improve the ecosystems that we live in. We do have some problems with beavers. They plug culverts, roads, irrigation districts. And the system in Colorado started about 30 years ago with a woman named Sherry Tippey, who formed a group called Wildlife 2000. That wetland or that website is still existing today. And one of our partners as we move forward with the Keystone Ecosystems Initiative was a Dr. Emily Fairfax. She started her work in Colorado and CU, has moved out to California. But as I talk about some of these opportunities this evening, most of what I'm going to tell you, an additional amount of information, is going to be available on YouTube at tremendous volumes. There's probably 75 to 100 current sites of beavers around the United States now going on. And it's a great opportunity to learn more about what we'd be doing in the state with this system. Some of the benefits of beavers: they recharge groundwater, sequester carbon, provide fire breaks, trap silt, and filter heavy metals. With some 18,000 abandoned mines in the high country, beavers provide a tremendous opportunity to clean that water that comes on downstream. And you probably know Colorado rivers support over 40 million people in 11 states right now, and they flow out in 35 different major rivers throughout the state. Some of those rivers, of course, Colorado, the Rio Grande, the Arkansas, North Platte, South Platte, Gunnison, are high elevation rivers, but we do have 3 or 4 that are low country. These are the Arickaree, the Republican, and the Big Sandy that we'll talk about a little later this afternoon. The initiative we're proposing is to go into the high country at the Pike National Forest and see if we can establish resident beaver colonies in some of these areas again. Our initial work is going to be looking at probably areas that hosted beavers in previous times. We probably will do some LiDAR flying, and we're going to need some on-the-ground field work, and I'm hoping that Wild Connections can find a few volunteers for us in this area. People that we put together for this coalition to work on the water and the fountain and Monument Creeks include 4 organizations. Global Choices is an international group working on the Arctic and the Antarctic. Wildlife 2000 is a beaver group. We've got Manitou Pollinators, the Butterfly Pavilion, Rocky Mountain Bees, and we've got a rancher down in Lamar by the name of Dallas May that runs the May Ranch. As we talk about this idea, this system, or the ecosystem, is a critical ecosystem. And as we spun out this project to look at beavers, there are several beaver dams on 21st Street on Fountain Creek. They're available to look at from the road. They're easily sighted. We've been talking to the Forest Service, Department of Wildlife, Parks and Wildlife, and also Colorado Springs to see if they would help establish a trail along this area. And in this regard, I was in that area with a lady by the name of Melanie Dowdy, who's with Manitou Pollinators. And as we looked at the area, she kept mentioning the opportunity for pollination. This is a good idea, great opportunity. We've got a good stand here. And it didn't resonate for a second, but she finally got down without the invertebrates, the bees, the butterflies, we wouldn't have the system we have today. And that's why we're looking at a system today with the people we have. It's entirely different than the large organization. We've got a short video that we'd like to show on how beaver dams are established. I think Allison is ready to link that in now. We have there we go.
Going to go ahead and run it one more time because it's so powerful and you might have missed. Was a piece that Dr. Emily Fairfax did when she was a student at University of Colorado. And if you Google on YouTube, you can find other projects that she's put out. She's got a very extensive system, and she's done a lot of research on the wildfires in Colorado and opportunities to maybe bring those areas back and use the beaver dams more as a fire break in many of our areas as timber starts to deteriorate. When we looked at the partnership for the Keystone Ecosystem Initiative, Melanie Dowdy brought in the butterfly pavilion and the beekeepers and explained to me, which should have been obvious a number of years ago, without the pollinators, 30% of the public's food wouldn't exist. And it's fairly easy to understand that if you have beaver dams, you're going to have vegetation and you're going to have pollinators to benefit. And as a result, we'll bring all that product back to the countryside. We do a lot of work with National Wildlife Federation, Audubon, and the Sierra Club. But for this groundbreaking research we're doing in Colorado Springs, we want to start at the base of the invertebrates, the bugs, the butterflies, and the bees, as they're the foundation. And this is going to be a critical situation, particularly in an urban area, with all the off-point pollution that we'll be suffering from. Many of the areas we're looking at are not going to be able to bring beavers in immediately. And with that, I'd like to present a short video on what we're talking about in regard to a beaver
dam analog. Allison, is that video available?
Yes, just a sec, I'll get it going.
Okay. There are places where beavers have left the countryside and maybe that stream is overgrown, and without the proper vegetation or support from other resources, to transplant beavers immediately would be a problem. They wouldn't have enough food to benefit from that area.
Rattlesnake
And a
Creek,
beaver dam analog is an artificial beaver dam.
Natchez River within the Yakima Basin. Rattlesnake Creek is home to multiple native species of fish, including threatened populations of both steelhead and bull trout. The cold, clean water of Rattlesnake Creek provides rearing habitat for salmon, steelhead, and bull trout. Some of these species spend multiple years in this system until they are large enough to migrate out to the main stem Yakima or potentially out to the ocean. However, not all rearing habitat is created equal. In Rattlesnake Creek, one of the limiting factors is side channel habitat. Fast-flowing, shallow stream channels have limited space available for rearing juvenile salmonids. In contrast, slower cold water habitat has a variety of complex areas for fish to hide. The best engineer of slow water habitat is the beaver. They are famous for cutting down trees and hauling them back to their homes and building complex dams that slow down water and create habitat for juvenile salmonids. So oftentimes when we're doing a project, we need to think like a beaver. We can emulate the beaver by taking a normal stream channel, driving in fence posts, and then weaving those fence posts with natural vegetation to slow down and back up the water. From a different view, the structure is added to an uncomplex stream channel. And what that does is it slows down and backs up water and spreads it out. This provides more area for juvenile salmonids to rear, improves conditions for plants to grow, and hopefully encourages beavers to return to the area to maintain these systems long term. In these structures, we can take a side channel with very low complexity and improve it to a place where it has much more rearing capacity for fish. Because these structures emulate beaver dams, they're called BDAs, or beaver dam analogs. A chainsaw is used to sharpen untreated fence posts to drive into the stream bed. A hydraulic post pounder is used by our crews to drive the fence posts deep into the substrate. This can be quite a challenge with all the boulders and cobbles in our streams. Once all of the fence posts are driven into the substrate, natural vegetation is woven between them, which immediately begins to back up the water and create more complex habitat. Branches trimmed from nearby trees are then placed in the side channel upstream of the BDAs to provide hiding cover for juvenile fish to prevent them from being preyed upon by birds. Using rebar and a steel mallet, the crew then begin to plant live stakes. The rebar is removed, native vegetation that is trimmed on site can be placed in the hole, which allows these cuttings of plants to access the water table. These cuttings of willow and dogwood will grow roots and hopefully mature into a large plant. Once established, these cuttings will become dense stands of riparian vegetation. This will improve habitat for fish and provide food for beavers. By installing beaver dam analogs in a side channel to Rattlesnake Creek, Big Columbia Fisheries hopes to improve this habitat for fish for years to come.
Thanks, Allison. Hope that'll give you some idea, because some of the others we're looking at on the small streams on Monument and Fountain Creek will definitely require beaver dam analogs, is that the vegetation doesn't exist today. The idea is to try to bring that vegetation back up to standard. And as we look at the opportunity for pollinators and invertebrates and bugs, butterflies, bees, we actually can go back to 1962 when Rachel Carson did the book Silent Spring. We've unfortunately left that on the shelf too long and it's gotten dust. So what we're finding, we're going back to the basics of what we're looking at for ecosystems as we look at the bigger areas, whether it's climate change or protecting Alaska or the roadless areas in the Colorado Springs, Pikes Peak area that Wild Connection works on a daily basis. These are the areas that we're going to be looking at, and we certainly look forward to possibly volunteers from Wild Connection to help us with the surveys we do and as we move into these wetland reestablished areas. As I mentioned, most of this information I presented and additional is available on YouTube. It's a great way to find out a lot more about how beavers can help. We're now finding ranchers are coming back into the situation. Although they've been an enemy and an advocate of beavers, they're finding that the wetlands in these areas benefit their ranch to a great degree. We do have a closing part, a ranch out in Lamar, Colorado. There's one of the showcases pieces for a wetlands established in the prairie and on a river that does not flow out of the mountains. The ranch is owned by Dallas May and his family. It's received the Aldo Leopold Award of the Ranch of Colorado. It's also been given a number of awards from Audubon and Ducks Unlimited because of the bird life they have. The Big Sandy flows through Dallas's ranch and it confluences on the Arkansas at the corner of his property. It's 7 miles long and the habitat above it all the way to the headwaters is completely dry. This ranch and the wetlands at part is some 30 to 40 yards wide and almost 100 yards wide in many areas. So it was obvious when the settlers came through this country and looking for ranching or farming, their need to get rid of the beaver dams was paramount. One, you couldn't get through them with a wagon, and two, you couldn't plow them. And I'd like to show that short video to give an idea of a piece of property that is unique in Colorado at this time.
Yeah, I'll cue it up just.
Hey, thank you. When the settlers came through the United States in the Great American Desert, the area was quite a bit different. It's remnant of what you're going to see now in that country at wetlands and beaver opportunities.
People have to be able to make their mortgage payments, and the way of life in this part of the country is you have to be able to farm and ranch, and sometimes that means plowing native grassland. Part of what we're doing is trying to maintain the natural setting that we have on the ranch. We have Sand Creek. It dissects the ranch for 7 miles, runs right through the middle of it.
The 7 or 8 miles of Sand Creek is a situation that we found when the trappers and the early settlers came through. All these small ephemeral streams that we see today in the plains parts of Colorado, Kansas, Montana, Nebraska, they all had water storage and they were all percolated and populated with beavers.
Most native grasslands disappeared so they could be farmed. But this ranch, because Sand Creek goes through the middle of it, it was protected from that. And now we have the opportunity to continue. That's the challenge we have, is how do we not mess it up? When you're driving along the highways, you don't really notice that you're looking, especially out here on the eastern plains, you can see for 50, 60 miles in one direction. And you think that's just barren land that really doesn't have that much diversity or a contribution to the environment. But I think when you're flying over it and you start to see these different biotypes and systems, you realize the diversity that is actually out there. And you see the areas that maybe have some emergent wetlands, and they're just magnets. As you go over a place like this ranch, it is potential to keep these places intact and become a magnet for seeds, species to move out into other areas. One thing that is a huge focus in these wetlands is we have a lot of beaver.
Look out the right side, you can look right into the wetlands on Sand Creek.
So these wetlands provide just a huge number of both intrinsic value and ecosystem service values to humans. Beaver are considered what's called a keystone species. And what a keystone species, what that means is that given their numbers, they have a disproportionately high and positive impact that reverberates throughout ecosystems. Not only do they mitigate a warming climate, they provide amelioration of many of the impacts of a warming climate. In water storage, as you know, particularly in our surrounding, if you look at the surrounding landscape, which is dominated by agriculture, those soils are actually releasing carbon, whereas the soils in that wetland are storing carbon. So they act as a really important balance against the impacts that we did by our agricultural practices. So maintaining that wetland, maintaining those beaver dams, it ameliorates both climate change and its impact.
This is an ecosystem that we've basically moved on from. We don't understand it. We've got more information on the high country throughout Colorado, and we probably have more information on the moon itself than we do on the importance of an ecosystem out here where we are today in Lamar on the prairie.
Native grasslands have so long been overlooked. 10 years ago, we started trying to do some conservation work, and every time I mentioned the fact that we were on the eastern Great Plains and a short grass prairie, there wasn't a lot of interest. Because when people think of conservation, they think of mountains and trees and streams and scenic areas, when in truth, the short grass prairies of the Great Plains have more diversity, have more species of wildlife, more species of plants, insects, and they contribute to the environment more than most people realize.
Short film, I've been out to the ranch twice, and it's interesting in that the Division of Water Resources, which is a department within the Department of Natural Resources, and the USGS Service are pushing the May Ranch to take the beaver dams out so the water can get to the Arkansas faster. That process has been slowed down, I think, because of the number of scientists that have been out there. Audubon has put a lot of pressure on them, and it's an unfortunate situation. The Great Prairies are roughly 950 million acres, including 10 states and 2 provinces. And when white man actually showed up, there were beaver throughout that country, and it was a much wetter, diverse ecosystem than it is today. And from the standpoint of climate change, water attracts water. And if that beaver dam situation was replicated to even 10% of its historical benefits, it would probably reduce the heavy storms that hit the Midwest and the East Coast today. I'd like to close with that. As I mentioned, The majority of the information on beavers can be found on YouTube. You're more than willing to email, or more welcome to email me. Give me a call if you had data, but I think there were some questions and I'm available to talk about that for a bit.
Oops. Okay. Hey. Great, Jerry. Oops. I am hoping to be able to get into the chat, and so that I can give. Pardon me, I was in the chat and I've lost my ability to be in the.
I can go ahead and read some of the questions if you'd like.
That would be great.
Thanks, Allison.
Question from Sally. Can you explain how beavers clean the water, slow water, and allow precipitation of pollutants, not really removing them? What are other ways they clean the water?
In regard to heavy metals, the heavy metals will filter out and fall out as the dam, they don't continue to move downstream. And it'll also filter other pollutants as the dam is stored up. It doesn't seem to adversely affect beavers, and it doesn't seem to be much of a problem for fish, but it does reduce the heavy metals from moving downstream.
Here's a I'll read this from David Rudin. He says, hello everybody, I'm David Rudin, checking in from Colorado Springs. I work at the Colorado Native Plant Society and am especially interested in restoration. And if you think about, I think what we've been learning about tonight, this whole thing is really wrapped up in that one word, restoration. And a lot of shoots like trees growing out of it are very, very helpful. I think I'm starting to see more and more. This is going to be very, very helpful to our society that is so water thirsty. So thank you, David.
And we have a tremendous opportunity on the Fountain system, working with the Fountain Water District. It's an urban area. We should actually be celebrating those streams as we start to clean them up. We're one of the few countries that called our army out to feed our rivers, and we're starting to reverse that trend.
Thanks, Jerry. Jerry had mentioned Melody Doherty, I think, Jerry, in your program, and she just said to everybody, hello. So thank you, Melody. That's great. Here's another greeting. Hello, all. I'm an environmental planner at the USAF Academy. Our natural resource people have recently used beaver dam analogs for stream restoration projects. And I'm going to turn that back over to Jerry, because he knows a good deal about what's been going on the Academy.
Thanks, John. Melanie Dowdy introduced me to the folks out at the Air Academy. They have relocated some beavers, and they have done some beaver dam analogs. And a lot of that development is used to enhance habitat for the Preble's jumping mouse. And the trails through the Academy go along Monument Creek, so it's a great opportunity if you're hiking or biking on those trails to be able to see what the opportunity is and the benefits. I had a couple other questions I missed. Could they pop back up again?
Let's see. I haven't. These have mostly been comments. Worthy comments. I haven't run into questions though. So
There's
From Melanie.
Allison, go ahead.
a question from Linda. Does the removal of trees by the beavers to create dams, mostly cottonwoods here in Colorado Springs, present a problem?
Now, cottonwoods will come back very quickly. Beavers will have a hard time out chewing willows. They will knock cottonwoods down, and there are places where you want to keep the trees, you're going to fence them. That's a standard process on golf courses. People with homes close to streams. Straight fencing will keep the beavers out of there, keep the willows from coming back in. But that's what they do participate in. If you noticed out at the ranch at Lamar, there are no trees out there. Beavers were able to get by on the vegetation that's existing with the plants in the creek now. So they're not an aspen or depending on cottonwoods either. Melanie had a question on what happens when it's reverse a straight stream versus one that's been dammed. It's not hard to drive around Colorado and see streams that have gone down 10, 15, 20 feet in size deep canyons. You increase the runoff, you increase siltation, and the benefits from all the benefits or opportunities from a slow moving water that is band up with wildlife and vegetation opportunities is lost. And we're starting to reclaim a lot of that kind of countryside. And that's where BDAs come in at a very valuable thing, because you wouldn't be able to bring beavers in there until the vegetation and the water had risen for protection.
Okay, there's a question from Claude. Where more specifically are the future survey areas located? So where are the areas that you're wanting people to go out and help?
We're going to look at all the headwater streams. That'd be the best place to start. A river, Colorado rivers are no better than their headwaters. And if we start there, slow the streams down. So what's going to happen, you're going to take the peak off of the runoff, and with storage of that water, you allow that water to come down later in the season. More on Sherry Tippy's work?
Yes.
Mentioned Sherry Tippy was a beautician in Denver when I met her 35 years ago. I was hosting a non-game advisory commission for the Department of Wildlife, and she had a question about hunting marmots. Somebody told me they were a delicacy and they used for fly tying, and they were kidding her. And she checked with Trout Unlimited, and we had lunch a day or two. She called probably a month later and said, I was out in Aurora. They're going to kill the beavers on the golf course. And she said, I told them I'd relocate them. Now we're talking about a woman who was a beautician that had lived her entire life in 30 square blocks in the middle of Denver. And we went out to the Division of Wildlife, and she bought a trapping license, so she was legal. And the Division of Wildlife loaned her 2 Hancock traps. That's what they call a suitcase trap. It's a live trap. And she was fishing for beaver in the canal that runs through Denver. The next morning, she called at 5 o'clock in the morning. She had 2 beavers, and then she wanted to know where she could relocate them. And we were working on Rocky Mountain National Park. The superintendent lost his beavers with a disease called tularemia, and offered to every beaver she could provide. And since that time, in 1985, Sherry's relocated over 1,000 beavers onto private properties.
All right, for Sherry.
And she does have a website, Wildlife 2000. Good way to check in on her.
Jerry, I've got a question for you. if you can explain basically when the water's slowed, and that means, of course, there's much more seepage into underground. But that's what we're calling increasing groundwater. And what does that really mean? Is it just here and gone, or what does it mean for the future of of those streams and the people and the buildings and so forth that are there?
Well, if the stream's running straight, if it's been in size, it's dropping down, it's basically moving very quickly. There's no storage, there's no groundwater storage. But in a beaver dam, and as you look at that storage, there are some great shots. That water spreads out a tremendous different directions on both sides. And this is outstanding habitat for invertebrates, bugs. And with a straight stream, you don't have that. But you do have that kind of participation for small invertebrates. And of course, then you get the plant life, the birds, the bees follow that. And the whole system becomes a keystone ecosystem, very critical. And we're down to 0.5% of the real estate in the state of Colorado still is a wetland. It's been death by 1,000 cuts as we move forward in the past to dry these areas up for a variety of things, and sometimes construction, sometimes farming.
Great, thank you. The water, does the water hang around once it drops down into the aquifer? Does it hang
It'll
around?
sponge out and return to the stream in a slower issue. Stream keeps running, they'll just run a lot longer.
That sounds to me to be what the bureaucrats are talking to Mr. May about in terms of knocking out the beaver dams and essentially channeling the water down to the Arkansas faster. And that's just you just gave us a good example of why that's not such a good idea.
One of the great examples is the LA River. If you can Google it, it's a concrete channel about 75 feet wide, and it runs through LA. This was their idea for flood control back in the day. And to their credit, Los Angeles is starting to restore that stream as it was originally. It'll make a tremendous parkway, similar to the Pueblo watershed and River Park.
So there's a question, when did Dallas May begin his work with beavers and land reclamation work?
When he bought the property, he still had a strong wetland in there. It was one of those areas that had not been disturbed or channelized, and the beavers were there when Dallas moved in 40 years ago. And he just has enhanced it since that time. On a side note, the Arapaho and the Cheyenne camped on Dallas's land 2 days before they moved north in the massacre.
Hey, Jerry, if you'll allow me, this is Dallas.
Hey, Dallas, thanks for checking in.
I have to apologize to the whole group. I came in at the 11th hour. Today and tonight, we actually have been fighting a wildfire on the Arkansas River. It came in about noon. I don't know how it started. I think it started off of Highway 50. And as of right now, it has burned about 6 miles of the Arkansas River bottom east of Lamar, between Lamar and Grenada. It has burnt the entire river bottom. The wind finally subsided when the sun set, and the fire is now under control. But that's another, I don't mean to be dramatic, but that's another case of what happens whenever we have changed the environment. And that kind of thing would not have happened if we had some of the benefits that beavers provide in this system. But it was a devastating day here in Southeast Colorado. I'm sure it'll probably make the news, but that's why I was not on the call when you first came on. And thankfully, I got on before you're done. But that's the kind of thing that we're trying to put halt to.
Little history on your beavers. Were they there? Was I correct, or did they come in after you had the property?
Jerry, the beaver have been on Big Sandy Creek on that ranch since God created them. They have never been off of it. It was only whenever Colorado and Kansas had a lawsuit over water that the state of Colorado became super interested in increasing state line flows. And that's when we started getting pressure to remove any water. What they wanted to do was create an incised channel instead of a meandering creek that had emergent wetlands. So whenever they tried to start increasing the state line flows of the Arkansas River, the state was looking for any way possible to drain wetlands and to increase that. Basically what they wanted was every stream to be a sewer drain, to convey the water as quickly as possible out of the functioning stream beds, change everything hydrologically. And so what has happened was, it's nothing, when that happens, it's nothing but flash, it's peaks and valleys. Whenever the water comes in or we have a moisture event, it quickly evacuates the land, goes to the river. Whereas on the ranch, we have a series of beaver dams for 7 miles. And that creates an alluvial aquifer on the ranch that is 2 miles wide in places. We have over 4,000 acres of emergent wetlands because of that. Now, downstream water rights owners feel like that is sequestering and impounding water, but you've touched on it tonight. Actually, that's not the case. That water is stored in the underground alluvial aquifer. In our case, it's in the sand bed, a gravel bed. That water is filtrated into that system. It's purified, and it lags slowly back to the river. The water all gets to the river, but it comes in a more organized fashion. And when we're in we have a wet period, that water is stored in the alluvial. When we have a dry period, that water is still going to the river in a lagged system. So that's why you and I first got acquainted, but that's one of the many benefits of beaver. It's a fallacy that beavers rob water from the system, because they do not. They provide the benefits and they bring the water to the system in a consistent, even basis.
Dallas, you had a fire several years ago. How's that move forward?
We actually had a fire that burnt the entire stream bed, our entire creek valley, April 22nd of last year. That fire started within a mile of where the fire today started, but it burnt our entire creek bottom, the entire valley of Sand Creek. And believe it or not, the resiliency of it today is remarkable. We've got everything is back except the 100-year-old cottonwood trees that were around the periphery of the valley. We lost almost all of our cottonwood trees, but everything else, because grass and wetlands almost appreciate a disturbance, they are about as vibrant and healthy today as they were pre-fire. And most of our endangered species have been documented to be back in. So the negative effects of it, and beaver, I have to tell this story, Jerry. In the throes of our fire last year, when that was happening, we had, after the fire was passed and we could go back and start trying to do some work to get things back, that night, we actually had cattle that had gone into the beaver dams and survived the fire because they were in the middle of the beaver ponds. And that seems like it's not true, but absolutely, I watched the cows before the fire go into those ponds. And after the smoke settled, we went back and cows were still standing like hippopotamus in the beaver dams, and it saved their lives.
Is the bird life returning, Dallas?
Pardon me, say it one more time, Jerry.
Are the birds returning down there?
Yes, we have a big colony of eastern black rail, which was placed on the endangered list last year. Colorado Parks and Wildlife, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, NRC, everybody's been working to document them, because April 22nd was at the height of the breeding season for the eastern black rail. They were afraid that those birds were either killed in the fire or would not return, because we lost all of the vegetation on the wetlands. But they recovered so quickly that through the course of the summer, CPW especially spent nearly the whole summer. They had people at night monitoring and doing audio checks. And we actually had an extremely successful breeding year with the Eastern Black Rail. Actually got some photos of chicks that hatched after the fire. So that's just one example, but yes, the wildlife, the plants, the invertebrates, everything seems to have returned, which is just a case for the resiliency of an intact, biodiverse habitat.
Alice, you brought some black-footed ferrets a few years ago. Did they survive?
Yes, the black-footed ferrets were on what we call our short grass system, and the fire did not touch that. The fire was such that we had straight hard winds running south and north, and it kept the fire in about a 2-mile wide path through the creek valley. And where the black-footed ferrets habitate is up above on higher ground in short grass, and it did not affect them.
I wanted to include Dallas and the May Ranch in this presentation because it's a extremely important ecosystem that we don't spend any time thinking about or talking about. And it's to reestablish the grasslands throughout the prairies, the Great Plains, and bring back beaver in these watersheds and the related wildlife, vegetation, and opportunities for pollinators would be important for this country to keep moving forward. And this is a resident watershed that we have to understand and protect because it's one of the few in Colorado, if not unique, and it's an outstanding resource that right on the Kansas line that we don't get a chance to celebrate enough. We get into the high country, and that's good. But these ecosystems are going to be important for the survival of mankind as we move forward.
Mr. May, this is John Stansfield with Wild Connections. I appreciate it so much for you joining in and sharing your experiences and the little cartoon that we had at the beginning about how beavers can deflect and fires and so forth. You've just brought it home to reality for us. And I appreciate it. I appreciate everything that you've been doing on your ranch and all these things that we've been talking about in relation to not just beavers, but to water management. If we're talking about management, letting nature manage the water too. I appreciate what you're doing, and thank you very much for joining us.
John, thank you. I was really sad as we got out of that situation tonight. I looked at my phone, I saw what time it was, and I was afraid I'd missed it. When I got on, it was just Jerry was just talking after the video. So I'm thankful I at least got to get on and be part of it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Keep up the good work.
Yes,
John,
sir.
It's interesting. You can look down the fence line and Dallas has grass 12, 14, 6 inches high. And you look at the property next to them, it looks like a parking lot. And that other ranchers don't understand that this is providing the grass that Dallas manages cattle on is a phenomenon. It's hard to realize.
And Jerry, thanks for bringing it up. And actually, cattle grazing is beneficial to the environment. It's beneficial to wildlife if it's done responsibly. They're complementary. They're not competitive, but as long as it's managed right, our cattle are actually taking the place of bison. And we have instances. We have one pasture in particular that we've never grazed. We keep it. It has 4 beaver dams in it, a lot of trees. We keep it as a sanctuary for wildlife. So in 40 years, we have not grazed that pasture. In our fire, all of our fences were burnt. And so now as the grasses started to restore, it made it very obvious, but the side of the fence that we have never grazed has no grass in it. It's patches of bare ground. The side that is heavily grazed is revegetated with many different species of grass. And the reason for that is because without the disturbance that cattle provide and the reseeding and the spreading of seeds, that grass, those properties become one monolithic type of plant, and they're not resilient. Those places that did not have cattle grazing had no resiliency after the fire. So just another example of the only reason our ranch still exists is because of cattle grazing, because people had to have a means of providing a living and making their mortgage payments. Our ranch happened to be a cattle ranch, and had that not been an available opportunity, it would have been plowed into farmland, and all of that pristine native habitat would have long ago disappeared if not for cattle grazing. So I'd like to use that example. Cattle grazing and ranchers are demonized all too often as being anti-environment, but it's quite the opposite.
You see that in the buffalo, they'd come through, graze an area heavily and move on. And the next year, those grasses would be back and the ecosystem would be total again.
Great.
There was a question that the state legislature is looking at a stream protection bill. It got a quick run a month ago, got shot down by the water buffaloes, and I understand it's coming back up next week. And I'm sure that Wild Connection will have a link to that potential legislation when it surfaces.
We'll make sure we do.
Interesting enough, the Division of Wildlife has not been a supporter of beavers until recently. And because of the intense work in the state, and a lot of that work from Dallas May, he's also on the Wildlife Commission. Now that the Parks and Wildlife has an opportunity for citizens to look at beaver or look at stream restoration, and now if you use beaver as part of that plan, they will consider funding. So that's been a tremendous turnaround in just the last year or so. They have $1.5 million every year they give to citizens that are restoring wetlands.
That's great to hear. We're getting to the end of our hour now, so probably gonna stop the recording, but if folks want to hang around and keep chatting, that was just fine. Thank you everyone for coming. Be sure to check out Wild Connections webpage at wildconnections.org and the Colorado Headwaters webpage at coloradoheadwaters.org. And we appreciate you joining us. We appreciate your support. And if you have an opportunity to give a donation to either of these organizations, that would be greatly appreciated. Any last thoughts before we stop the recording?
I want to thank you, Allison and John and Wild Connections for putting it on. I greatly appreciate it. It's good to catch up with John after a few years missing him.
Thanks, Jerry. It's been just like old times.
That's right.
For you and me.